Thank you. Well, a real treat to follow Leah and, incredible wealth of grounded knowledge she has, grounded in, are we getting feedback? No. Grounded in so much, clinical experience. I think we're very lucky to have that. That's great. And it's really special to be here and amongst all these people that are so engaged in shifting health in positive directions. Yeah, beautiful community. I'm grateful to be here. So this session, we're talking about the breast milk microbiome and glycobiome. And glycobiome is basically the special sugars which are in milk, which have some pretty amazing functions, which we'll discuss. I'll also spend a bit of time looking at some of the strategies that women can use to get good breastfeeding help, to get breastfeeding off to a good start. And I know probably many of you are not breastfeeding or perhaps may not be breastfeeding again, but you are going to have women in your lives that you can potentially assist in terms of being a resource to them. So I'm hoping that it helps you. If it doesn't help you, it helps other people in your life, potentially your daughters or other people important to you. So, it is great. So we can see breast milk is really the ultimate gardener of the infant gut. It seeds, it provides a diverse range of bacteria. 100 to 600 species are present. Oh,
can you move the microphone higher?
Higher, sure. Is that better? Can you all hear me better now? Great. I can hear me better now too. So 100 to 600 bacteria species in each woman's milk. And what's quite astounding about this is that is quite a lot more than the average number of bacteria species in the human gut. So we're potentially looking at the most diverse ecosystem on the body. I mean, this is an area of growing research and inquiry. So watch this space and we might find that information changes. Being the ultimate gardener, breast milk also feeds. So it is an abundant source of prebiotic and prebiotic-like substances. And one of those very special groups of substances or compounds are the human milk oligosaccharides, which we'll talk a little bit about. And there's also a range of other prebiotic substances in breast milk. And basically, what they do is they encourage the growth of, in particular, bifidobacterium species that are beneficial to the infant and other species that are important for our infant's microbiome. So looking at the human milk oligosaccharides, they're the third most abundant component in human milk. So there's actually, on a gram to gram basis, there's more human milk oligosaccharides than there is protein in human milk. That's how important they are to our infants, that the body is willing to invest that much energy to create so much of these. And what's interesting is early researchers thought they were kind of like a waste product, that what was the body doing creating this waste product? The infant can't digest it. Well, actually, it was the food for the microbiome. There's 200 different HMOs that have been identified so far, and identifying these is tricky. They're hard to characterise. The technology is growing, so we'd probably like to find there are actually more than that. And each mother has a unique set. So we have this diversity within our species. And aside from being prebiotics, they have many other functions centred around protecting the infant and protecting the breast. So looking at breast milk as the ultimate gardener, the other quality that breast milk brings is that it weeds. It has components within it that are selectively suppressing potential harmful bacteria that might be in the infant's gut. So these include lysozymes, lactoferrin, but also the human milk oligosaccharides. So not only do they feed the good guys, they're also suppressing the ones that we don't want there. So looking at how that happens, this is one way. There's actually about 5 different ways, but I just want to talk about one way that human milk oligosaccharides help to protect the infant from pathogens. Based on the clicker. Oh, yes, great. So pathogens, including bacteria, viruses, and protozoa, often need to be able to attach to something on one of our human cells before they can invade. And often they'll attach to a sugar process coming off one of the human cells. And what the oligosaccharides do is they basically are kind of a copycat to those. So they're like a decoy, and the pathogen will get their receptors stuck full of these oligosaccharides, and then they're basically swept out. So this we call this surface protection, and this is important in the gut, but also the genitourinary system, preventing urinary tract infections in infants, and also helping to prevent ear infections in infants. And when we look at just the data that we have on the growing number, what's the growing data we have, because things haven't changed, we're just learning more. Here's just a list of some common, I guess, more well-known pathogens for which there are human milk oligosaccharide decoys. It's structurally specific, so different human milk oligosaccharides provide protection against different pathogens. And the other thing is that there are so many other factors in breast milk that are protecting our babies. So if we just look at that concept a bit more, researchers have coined this term, the maternal-infant hybrid immune system, with basically the concept there being part of the baby's immune system actually resides in their mother. So the mother provides, via the breast milk, non-specific defence immune cells. So we have living immune cells within breast milk. We have the probiotic bacteria. We have prebiotic components. We have these viral blocking and bacterial blocking agents, including the human milk oligosaccharides, but other ones as well, and then the antimicrobial agents that I mentioned before. Then we have more specific immune defence. So when mothers are exposed to pathogens, she creates specific antibodies that are passed through her breast milk. And what's quite extraordinary, more recent studies have suggested that when the infant is unwell, independently of the mother, that this actually modifies the way the mother's immune system works, and she will provide immune responses for her baby through her milk. So we can really see that the baby is in an immune cocoon, if you like, and the vehicle for that is obviously the breast milk. And so when mothers and babies are together, getting exposed to the same pathogens, this really enhances this system, because when the mothers and babies are getting exposed to the same things, and the mother can provide protection to the baby. So just coming back to the breast milk as the ultimate gardener, because that was a little bit of a sidestep there. We've got that it seeds, it feeds, and it weeds. And I will repeat that a few times because I just feel like it's a really great thing to go home with. Because of this, the microbiota of the breastfed infant looks a particular way. It's dominated in Bifidobacterium species. And it's not just any Bifidobacteria species. These are special ones that like to eat those human milk oligosaccharides. They love them, and they eat them in preference to other bacteria. And these are the ones that are particularly important for infant health. We can see them as kind of like the coach or I had another word before to describe it. Anyway, coach to the infant's gut. The infant's gut is immature and it doesn't quite know what to do. It's leaky and it needs training. And these special infant-specific Bifidobacteria, that's their job, is to train the infant gut. So they promote gut barrier development. They promote immunotolerance. They teach those cells, the infant's gut cells, what's a friend, what's a foe. And in that way, they're helping to prevent allergy. They play a role in metabolic programming, helping that infant to have a healthy metabolic system and less likely to be obese. They help to defend the gut from pathogens, so they are also working in that way. And basically, they're just keeping the inflammation levels down while that brand new gut is developing. And we know, I guess, that gut-brain connection, we can see that keeping inflammation down in the gut is really important for infants' brain development. What the researchers are suggesting is it's really important that infants spend an adequate time period with this influence. This is actually a less diverse ecosystem than what they'll have when they get older. It's kind of a more narrow ecosystem, but it's a really important training time for their gut while it's immature. And we want infants to get into this chapter nice and quickly, and we want them to stay there for adequate amount of time. So things that will slow down them getting into this chapter are caesarean birth, antibiotic exposure, being premature. These are the infants that take a little bit more time to get into this chapter, as well as infants that aren't breastfed, of course. We also want them to stay there long enough, so that's really about a good period of exclusive breastfeeding, aiming for that 6 months, and then adequate continued breastfeeding, going with the WHO goal of 2 years. So just a slide here, which is an addition, because I thought I should connect some dots here to autistic spectrum disorder. There's been a recent systematic review and meta-analysis showing that not being breastfed increases the risk of ASD, which isn't surprising. Interesting, even more recent study, small study, so it needs to be replicated, but suggesting that being exclusively breastfed for that first 6 months is particularly helpful for preventing the risk in infants that are at higher risk. And perhaps this is because we're decreasing their risk of infection because they've got that protection, and we're helping to train their gut ecosystem. There's way more to it than that, but at this point, I just want to mention that this is a time where it's not that easy for women to breastfeed. They've got culture against them, and it's really easy for them to feel blamed and to feel like there's a lot of pressure. And I think, it's a lot different than it was a few hundred years ago. And we'll talk a bit more about how strategies to try and get off to a good start. But I think that just to say a couple of things at this point, most women can breastfeed. There's a very small amount, a very, very small amount will have a physical obstacle to breastfeed, but many women experience a number of obstacles in their breastfeeding journey, whether that be how breastfeeding is protected in their birthplace, the sort of support they're able to access on their breastfeeding journey, and the kind of myths and things like that they encounter. So we really need to see it as a whole culture issue, not all hanging on each mum. Yeah. So coming back to the breast milk microbiome, I want to talk about that a little bit more, but we can say that there are lots of bacteria in breast milk, and it's diverse. Breast milk is a really alive, it's a tissue, we call it a living tissue because it's adaptive and it's full of living cells and bacteria. And we don't need to feel alarmed that there's lots of bacteria in there, because we know they've got the safety nets in there, the prebiotics that select what grows, and the weeding that also prevents pathogens from growing. So how do the bacteria get into the breast? There's 3 main ways that we know about. First of all, via mother's skin. And previously we used to think that breast milk, the only reason why there was bacteria in there was because it was contaminated from the skin. But now we're learning that actually there's other ways that bacteria get to the breast milk. One way, which is quite fascinating, is from the infant, from their saliva and from their gut. When they're suckling, there can be some reverse flow. And it may be an important process that as the infant goes through the birth canal, that they pick up important bacteria from the birth canal and inoculate the breast. And there's a bit of research on this, looking at that this may be the way that some bacteria get to the breast, is actually coming first of all from the birth canal, and then the baby bring it to the breast. And then the breast is the perfect environment to protect and grow those particular bacteria, so it becomes a reservoir for them. And the other way, which is, I'm curious to know if any of you've come across this, is from the mother's gut. How could bacteria get from the mother's gut to the breast? Is this something that you've heard happen? Is it news? No? Yeah. Well, there's a hypothesis that there's a gut memory pathway. And basically the idea here is that immune cells reach into the mother's colon, select bacteria and transport them to the breast. And it sounds kind of extraordinary and like science fiction, but there is some growing data to support this. First of all, we find unique match strains in a woman's stool, her breast milk, and then her infant's stool. Secondly, there's been a whole bunch of, fairly difficult to read animal studies, so I really like reading animal studies, but some where they've actually tagged microbes and been able to track their movement. They've seen them interacting with the immune cells kind of shepherding them along. So it's becoming fairly convincing. And then thirdly, we have more studies coming out showing that when we give certain probiotic strains to mothers, that they can be found in their breast milk or in their infant stool. This is a very strain-specific trait though, so not every probiotic will be transferred like that. So pretty exciting to think that the bacteria in mum's gut might be immunoported to the breast. There's also a theory that there may be a pathway from the mouth to the breast, which I thought might be interesting. And there's also some ideas around when this happens. So this seems to start happening in the last trimester of pregnancy, perhaps be a bit of a burst around labour with labour hormones, kind of encouraging the pathway to really ramp up, and then it continues through lactation. Let's look at the functions of the breast milk microbiota. Well, it's a source of pioneer species for the infant, bacteria seeding. And isn't it nice to know that there's a source of pioneer seeding that goes beyond the birth process? So for all those women that and babies that don't end up having the vaginal birth that they've planned, I think it's really nice to know that there's kind of backup here. The other main function is the breast milk microbiota helps to protect the breast from mastitis. So when you have a healthy breast milk microbiota, you have a bit more resilience and you're less likely to develop mastitis when you have perhaps a longer gap between feeds or some other interruption with perhaps you wore a bra that was too tight or something. The woman that has not the healthiest composition might very quickly go into a severe mastitis picture, whereas when you have a healthy microbiota, it sort of provides you with a bit of defence and you're less likely to get a more severe mastitis issue. The other beautiful function, and this is really a combination of the bacteria and all those other components, is that breastfeeding promotes microbiota resilience. Breastfed infants' microbiota returns back to normal after antibiotic exposure more effectively than infants that are not breastfed or who are breastfed less. And there's a growing number of studies looking at this, which is quite encouraging and I think great thing for mothers to know, because they are often feeling like, should I be giving my baby a probiotic, or look what your baby's already getting. Also helps offset some of the impact of a caesarean birth on the microbiome. And that's because it's the ultimate gardener, seeding, feeding and weeding. So this, just to share some thoughts on probiotic supplements and the breastfeeding infant. In the clinic that I work, we don't give probiotics directly to young infants under 6 months when they're breastfed. And first of all, the reason for that is because we want to acknowledge what the baby's already getting from mum, an abundance of pre and probiotics in her milk. If we do give probiotics, we'll give them to mum. And we see the mother as kind of a mummy filter. And we want to avoid exposing the baby to the fillers and excipients that are in all products. And we're also aware there's a possibility of microbial contamination of all probiotic products, and that can happen in manufacturing, it can happen in storage, and it can very easily happen in the home environment, because the medium has to be able to support the survival of those bugs. So if you're opening and closing a container in the home environment, there's the possibility of contamination. The infant has an immature gut and it's vulnerable to allergy and infection. So for those reasons, we much prefer to give them through the mother. We need to select strains with evidence of transfer to the breast milk though. So what about an infant that's not breastfeeding? There are some specific probiotic strains that may be beneficial, but it's really important to seek advice about a strain with evidence of safety and effectiveness in infants, because not all probiotics are equal. And sometimes a prebiotic may be appropriate, but again, this needs to be carefully selected. But really our first step is to check in with mum and see if we can do anything to support breastfeeding and get that back on the rails. Not always possible, but sometimes we can help support women to relactate or partially relactate. And now I've been talking too much and moved a bit slow, so let's see how I go with getting through this. But now I just want to talk about some strategies for really getting breastfeeding off to a good start, and perhaps dispel a few myths around breastfeeding. So first of all, I think getting things off to a good start, it really is good for that to start in pregnancy. My observation is that most mums are focused on the pregnancy and the birth, which is natural because that is a rite of passage, and I think it's very natural for that to be our focus. And our great ancestors in the past didn't need to think about breastfeeding when they were pregnant because they had been growing up around breastfeeding everywhere. It had been modelled to them everywhere, and they had, a whole, swag of aunties and mothers and grandmothers that were really confident breastfeeders that could support them. But we've had 2 to 3 generations of formula feeding being kind of the normal way of feeding babies, and so our knowledge line has been severed. So because of that, we need to really help mums to get connected early. I really encourage them to get connected with the Australian Breastfeeding Association, go to the local groups, just access information. It's a great gift if you know someone that's pregnant. It's a great gift to give them a gift to the membership. They get their lovely Essence magazine in the mail. It's got lots of stories that women have written. It's very engaging and personal and accessible. If that doesn't work for the mum, the other option is to work with a lactation consultant and get kind of some education during pregnancy, or at least attend some classes. Some kind of pearls, I'd say. Skin to skin in the beginning is so important for getting breastfeeding off to a good start. We've got the concept of the golden hour, but we need to open that out, and it's really the first week and the first 6 weeks. But in those first days to week, just encouraging. Something I'm often doing is encouraging parents to resist the temptation to put their baby in a cute jumpsuit. Just keep them naked, keep them with you. And the reasons are, skin to skin supports maternal milk supply, it helps the infant be orientated and know where they are, they're better at attaching, they're better at feeding, their reflexes work better, their feeding reflexes. It keeps the infant warm, that can stabilise their body temperature, the cardiovascular system is more stable, reduces pain and distress for the infant, it promotes maternal attachment, it reduces the risk of that infant receiving an artificial milk supplement, and it provides an opportunity for the bacteria of the mother's bacteria on the skin to be transferred to the baby. And I think when mothers and babies have been separated or had some sort of birth trauma, skin to skin is extra important. It's a great way of regrouping. A golden rule about milk supply, which I find isn't commonly known, is the more milk removed from the breast, the more milk made by the breast. Very simple. Once you kind of have that concept, and probably many of you do, it just kind of makes sense, and it makes people understand how breastfeeding works. So the more frequently and completely milk is removed from the breast, the more rapidly breast milk is made. And when we feed our babies according to cues, thank you, rather than a timer, then usually the relationship between the mother's supply and the baby's needs is perfect, and that's unless there's an underlying issue there that needs to be addressed. Effective removal from the breast, effective milk removal to stimulate supply depends on frequent feeding or expressing for adequate duration. Night feeding is really important, so training babies how to sleep through the night is terrible for milk supply. Feeding according to cues, as I said, and knowing that it's normal for babies to cluster feed. They often cluster feed in the evening, and that's a normal thing. They'll feed, and they feed again, and then they feed again, and they're trying to access that hind milk and really tank up, ready to have a longer sleep. We need to have an effective attachment or latch, and a good milk ejection reflex, which works better when mums are feeling relaxed and comfortable and not in pain. So these are some flags for when mums can try and get help early, because I think one of the things that happens is there's problems and people don't get help early enough, or they get help and it isn't good help. So I guess it's get help early, and then if that help doesn't work, try getting some different help. So who to see, a breastfeeding counsellor or a lactation consultant. And the cues for doing that are when mum feels concerned about her milk supply. Many women doubt their milk supply. It's one of the most common reasons that women stop breastfeeding, and they'll doubt their supply when their baby's fussy, when their breasts feel softer, and these things don't necessarily mean she has low supply. They can, but they don't necessarily mean it. So it's really important to get some skilled help with assessing whether milk supply is really low or not. And when it comes to helping boost a supply, ensuring there's a good attachment and effective removal of milk, and frequent removal of milk is the key, cue-based, and sometimes it needs to be more frequent than cue-based. Noting that supplementing can be really detrimental to supply. So mum starts doubting her milk supply, so she gives a top-up feed in the evening, baby's full of the formula instead of her milk, and then we just end up with this spiral happening, and it's such a common story. Sometimes supplementing is needed. It's just really important to get some help to assess, unpack whether it is or not. And then there's different ways of giving a supplement, and if there are ways of giving a supplement at the breast, and that's a way of supplementing in a way that doesn't impact the breast supplies as much. Spacing out feeds will also decrease supply, and sometimes parents will do that because they feel like, well, if I wait a bit longer, my breasts feel fuller, but that's actually giving the breast the message to make less. Some other flags, and I'll go through these more quickly. If there's a concern about weight gain, if there's low urine output or stool output, and I've got here, I'm not sure if anyone wants any, but I've got these lovely poo charts. If anyone would like one, come and get one off me, and they just show you what normal poos should look like in babies. Nipple pain or damage, red flag, get some help. Usually it's caused by an attachment issue, not thrush. Usually it's an attachment issue. Breast pain, mastitis is something to get. It's tricky to get good help with mastitis because most practitioners are a bit at sea with this. So I encourage mums who think they've got mastitis to get the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine's mastitis protocol. If they're going to a GP, take that with them, and you're less likely to end up with an antibiotic prescription because that gives really clear guidance about when and when not to prescribe antibiotics. If the baby's sleepy or dopey, then that can be a flag. They're not getting enough milk, so that needs to be assessed and checked. Frequent crying and fussing at the breast can be because of a positioning issue. Concerns about the safety of medication is a common reason why women stop breastfeeding, and it's good to know that most medications are minimally transferred to the breast, and only a handful of medications are contraindicated, so it's getting a second opinion, good advice on that before making a rash decision. Here are some really great breastfeeding resources. This is an excellent document available from the the Australian Breastfeeding Association. It's basically a template for writing a breastfeeding plan, so mothers can and fathers, families can request what sort of care they want so that it supports breastfeeding, and it gives good kind of backup evidence for each point. What I would say is that there's much misinformation in this area, many unhelpful myths. 2 to 3 generations of formula feeding being the norm has really disrupted our knowledge base. Feeding and sleep routines are based on a formula era, and many health professionals have received minimal health training in breastfeeding. But it's getting better, and the training is getting better. So it's really important for mums to connect with people that are most likely to be able to help, like a breastfeeding counsellor or a lactation consultant. And just after kind of that segue, I'll just come back to summarising what we talked about at the first part of the presentation, the breast milk microbiome and glycobiome. So we know that breast milk is a diverse source of bacteria that seeds the infant's gut, and the bacteria originate from multiple sources, and potentially a gut memory pathway, potentially an oral memory pathway, and I'm wondering if there's a possibility of a genital urinary memory pathway as well. Human milk oligosaccharides are really important components within milk. There's 200 different ones. Each mother has a unique set, and they nourish those special infant-type bifidobacteria that are important for training the newborn and young infant's gut. They protect against a range of pathogens. You can see breastfeeding as the ultimate gardener of the infant gut, supporting development of a healthy microbiome that is resilient in the face of disruptors. And that's where I finish. This is Hera, the Greek goddess, creating the Milky Way, which gives you a feeling of the magnificence of breastfeeding, but it's worth stating that it is also just normal physiology as well. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Dawn.